Record to the cloud. So awesome. Today we have Ryan Dreyer on. As I mentioned before, he is a total superhuman. We'll get a little bit into your story, but Ryan's a friend of mine from college, and Facebook was kind enough to be constantly feeding me his content due to their algorithm, and I guess due to me liking fitness stuff. So for, I guess, a couple of months, I was seeing Ryan's posts, and here's a guy who is out there running like 2 hours at a time or cycling 3 hours at a time, which lots of people participate in endurance sports, but not many people, when they post their stats, are doing all these things at heart rates that are insanely low and with incredible efficiency. So I reached out to Dreyer a couple of weeks ago and just said, hey man, I want to hear about what you're doing. Like it looks awesome. It looks super inspiring. And hopefully we can share that with some of our students. So we're here today. And Dreyer, I'll let you kind of just introduce yourself and like tell a little bit of your story of kind of like how you got into what you're doing and where you are today. And then we'll just go from there. So let's do it, man.
Sweet, dude. Well, thanks for the intro and thank you for hosting me here. I'm really pumped to be chatting with you guys. And I'm glad that we've got a cool group of your athletes and excited to just kind of chat a little bit more on all this kind of stuff. But I guess to give a little bit of background about what I'm up to, I guess I'll just start with like present day. And I'm really big into Ironman racing right now. So I've got Ironman Texas is coming up on April 23rd. And then I've got Ironman Florida that is going to be in November of this year. This past fall and this past summer was kind of my first real introduction into the sport of triathlon after really trying to get into it for a little while. I think that to kind of give a good starting point of my story and kind of what's changed a lot in my life in terms of like fitness and personal development and mindset and just kind of taking on more challenge than I previously was. I really circle the date that I just decided to buy a road bike. And that was back in February of 2019. I had just moved from Nashville back towards Philadelphia, where I'm from. And at that time, I was really, really taking in a lot of like Cameron Haynes type stuff, Goggins type stuff, Courtney Dowalter, all these types of people that had been on Rogan. I just really started to hear about them, learn about them. And I just love the way that Rogan's podcast is just sort of a 3-hour open forum. And I really just got to recognize that these people are really no different than me. And I feel like I'm missing something in my life. And I think that taking a step towards living how these people live is something that can provide me with a lot of fulfillment. And so I had been somebody who'd kind of just gone to the gym pretty consistently, but without really attaining huge results for most of my 20s, I guess. And then I bought my road bike when I was 26. I ended up breaking my ankle shortly after that. So my first year of road riding was actually kind of a null. But then once 2020 rolled around, I had had surgery. I had actually had a deviated septum fixed, which was kind of a huge deal. We'll get into some breathing and some heart rate stuff. And then I basically spent all of 2020 when the world was shut down, just riding my bike. So every single weekend, my wife and I would just head out to the suburbs. We would ride. I was trying to do a couple of half Ironmans in 2020, but because of what was going on, none of those races took place. So that fall, I had achieved basically my best level of fitness ever, and wanted to do something cool, and I couldn't do any triathlon. So I decided to do a couple of ultra marathons, which really, really helped just sort of break my brain on what I'm capable of. My first race was a 50K. And then I had a buddy who did a similar race on the same day. And the day after, he like hit me up to do 100K 4 weeks later. And I was just like riding the high of taking on the biggest accomplishment of my life. And I was like, I'm down, let's do it. So those two events like happened really quickly and were really a good launching pad for me, kind of taking my training to the next level in 2021. A lot of my training in the beginning of kind of just getting into triathlons and riding was really just pushing my distance a lot. But then I started working with a coach in the early part of summer 2021. And that's when I started to learn a lot about heart rate training, about recovery practices, about really like how much of an art form and a craft it is to put together a triathlon training protocol with different, bursts of high intensity, low intensity, recovery efforts, mid efforts, that kind of stuff. So that was a really great opportunity for me to just learn a lot more. And then this past summer and fall was really like my first introduction to the sport fully. I did a Olympic try in the Poconos, which are north part of Pennsylvania. And then my wife and I came out to Boulder, and we did the Boulder half Ironman. And when I did Boulder, I qualified for Worlds. So then 4 weeks later, I went to Utah and raced at the 70.3 World Championships. And then 2 weeks after that is when I did Ironman Indiana. And then all of a sudden it was like, holy cow, I'm into this.
And animal, man. Animal.
Yeah. So that's probably a good little starter with.
Yeah, that's awesome. So go back and tell me what's coming up for you. You said Ironman Texas in April, and then what else?
Yeah, so I've got Ironman Texas in April, and then Ironman Florida in November are my big races. I've got a 70.3 that I'm doing. That's kind of a local race in Massachusetts this summer. And we're out in Colorado now. So I'll probably sprinkle in like a small sprint or an Olympic or something like that along the way. But those are kind of the big guys that I've targeted.
Cool. I'm sure you'll just plug in questions when you're ready. But I was just going to say, like, kind of drawing all this stuff together, like what is your training like now? So you were saying how in the beginning it was about distance and stuff like that, but like this week, what's your training look like from Sunday to Saturday?
Yeah, so I actually kind of look at Wednesdays as the start of every week. So today I have a 4,400 yard swim, which is, I think, a little bit over the 2.4 miles that the Ironman swim would be. And that's kind of an endurance swim. Those are 11 sets of 400, which is pretty long. And I've also got an hour and 20-minute ride, which is a little bit more of an interval ride, not like super, super high intensity, but those are kind of the big efforts that kick off the week. On Thursday, I've got actually a recovery ride, which is kind of unique. I've got a recovery ride and a lift. It would usually be a run on Thursday, but because of what I'm doing on the weekend, I'm keeping my week a little bit lighter. I've got another big swim on Friday. And then right now, like the big bulk of my week is just like a huge effort on the weekend. So this Saturday, I have a 5-hour ride into a 90-minute run, which is going to be the biggest training session of my entire life. And I've kind of been having these enormous sessions, just building over the past like 8 weeks or so. Sunday, I've got, I think, a recovery effort. Monday is almost always like a recovery style swim. And then Tuesday is off. So there's a really, really delicate art form to pushing it really hard on the weekend and then kind of tapering off with an easier effort on Sunday, and then a swim on Monday, and then full rest, and then kind of launching it all again with a big Wednesday.
How did you come up with that schedule where like Wednesday became the start of your week? Is that related to like work demands, or was this kind of a different decision?
So I was kind of guided in this direction, truthfully. My coach had sort of this protocol set when I started working with them, but I really like it. And I think that it's super important because I think a big mistake that people make is really just doing nothing after huge efforts. And there's like times when that is appropriate, but for the most part, you want those long efforts to be at a heart rate zone where your body is able to recover in some quick capacity, and then using those efforts to kind of keep pushing your endurance and just keep working on your cardiovascular system is super huge, as opposed to, maybe when I was working on my own or kind of in the beginning of this, like I'd go bust ass and ride, 50, 70 miles on Saturday and then maybe do nothing on Sunday. I mean, it wouldn't always work out like that. I'd kind of use the weekends to do probably 2 big days, but I wouldn't really be as calculated coming off of the big efforts.
It's interesting you say that because, I mean, this is a slightly different adaptation as far as like strength versus long distance endurance, but I kind of just had that same experience. On Sunday, I hit a high water mark. I did 120 long cycle reps. And so long cycle with the kettlebells is 1 clean and 1 jerk equals what's called 1 long cycle. And that's just the phrasing used to describe that sequence of movements. And so this was 120 with a 32 kilo in each hand. And that was the most I had ever done in a single session. But like you said, because it was set up in a way to be lower intensity, like it was done in small sets. Then 2 days later, which was yesterday, I had like a maximal effort pressing session and broke 3 separate PRs, even though like just 2 days before I had one of the highest volume sessions ever, right? And so I think what you said is really important, kind of this idea of if you're doing things at a manageable intensity, subsequent activity shouldn't really be that affected by what you're doing. I mean, just looking at this, it's huge, man. A 5-hour ride and a 90-minute run is tons and tons of volume, and yet you'll still be able to get out there on Sunday and Monday and move and do some training, right? So, how did you discover, if you will, that secret, like the secret of low intensity efforts, or the importance of that stuff?
Yeah, so I think it just came a little bit from like just like the natural evolution of getting into it and forcing myself through some stubbornness, as well as having some good guidance. Back when I was kind of just pushing my endurance on my own, you know, you kind of will run into the roadblock that like if you spike your heart rate a lot and if all of a sudden you're putting out like enormous pushes, like your recovery is just going to be super noticeable. Like the next day you're going to be gassed, even getting home after that ride. Like I had a ride a couple of weeks ago where like I did not do a good job of keeping my heart rate low. And when I came home, like even like in the 30 minutes, hour, once I kind of started to settle in after the ride, like I was killed, I was crushed. So it's been a little bit of like me figuring that out on my own, as well as then kind of being guided towards it. And what I'm trying to do with Ironman is ultimately qualify for the World Championships at Kona is what it's called. So like, I want to get good at this and I want to perform as best as I can. And I think that one analogy that really has resonated with me is the idea of burning matches. And it's kind of something in kind of the cycling community where it's like, you have a set amount of matches. And it doesn't matter if you're only 10 minutes into your ride, but if you find yourself on like a huge hill and you like really ball out and bust ass, like that's great, but that's a match. And you only have so many matches that you can tap into. And then, you know, especially trying to leverage running off the bike. It's just kind of bringing all of that together to piece it together, because you really need to recognize like that your heart rate needs to be able to jump when you start running. Otherwise, it's like apparent that you bike too hard. So like there are levels to figuring out how much is too much, while at the same time still trying to obviously push your performance and still put out strong times. One thing that one of my coaches says that like just sticks to me is that like the goal isn't to like ride at a higher heart rate. The goal is to ride faster at a lower heart rate. So you want to crank more watts while being more efficient.
The cool part is that everyone that's on the call like knows this and plays with that low intensity, long duration work, but also like does the same thing in our interval type conditioning structures. What would your advice be, or like how do you work with folks who like can't seem to grasp that concept? Meaning that like if you have an athlete and they start a running program, and they say to you like, well, I'm keeping my heart rate here, but I'm running so slow, right? Like I'm running 14-minute miles or something like that. How do you help someone work through that perspective of like the value of doing what they're doing, even if it feels so slow?
Yeah, so it's definitely tricky because you're spot on that, especially people who are new to running, you know, their heart rate is just going to shoot up no matter what, as soon as they start moving. And then all of a sudden, like they get into the thing where they're trying to slow down more and it's not really changing anything. So there are a couple of different things that I can touch on here. The first is that for somebody who's new to it, your heart rate is going to reach a certain level as long as you're running at any pace. So a lot of times when I look at slower efforts for newer people, we just focus on downgrading their pacing. I don't usually work with pacing too much, but with recovery efforts, it's really helpful because I don't want somebody to be trying to run like a 14 or a 15-minute mile and just not seeing their heart rate drop at all. I think I saw something online a couple of weeks ago that said like 13-minute mile is about the point where every human being would feel more efficient walking. So it's like, we don't want someone running in place essentially. Right. So that's kind of the foundation, and then just encouraging them and reminding them that this just takes time. But also I really like to basically allow people to tap into, like, I call it gear shifting with their running. So tempo runs are a really big staple in the programs that I write. which is basically, you know, it might be an hour run and it might have a 15-minute gradual warm up into your zone 1. Then you're pushing up into your zone 2 for 15 to 20 minutes. You drop back down in between the effort, and then you hop back up and do another 20-minute push. So giving people those extended pushes that aren't quite like 30-second sprints is a really good way to teach people to raise their performance and then drop it back down. And the drop down is really huge because that's another area that people can make progress when they're not necessarily seeing their heart rate translate to their running speeds, is that heart rate recovery. So when people are just seeing their heart rate climb and climb and climb, I just try to remind them that it's beneficial to bring that down during the interval recoveries. And so if it's not working so well for them on the climb, or if it's climbing too much and they can't manage that, then like, that's okay. Another chance to just try to steal some progress is bringing that down whenever the set is finished. Because however much your heart rate can recover is also a really good indicator of how fit you are.
And are those like let's say it's a 1 hour tempo run, are those recovery periods just lower paced or lower tempo running, or is it passive recovery, like full blown stand still and rest?
Yeah, so it's almost always just downgrading to a lower heart rate zone. If we do like really hard intervals, like 5 by 60-second hill sprints is one that I loop in. And that's one where it's like, if you want to like walk for a few seconds, or if you need to, then that's okay. But we don't really do much standstill work. There are occasionally times though, depending on the intensity, that the recovery can be stopped, or basically do a complete standstill. There's one workout that we do on the bike that's like probably the hardest bike workout. We just call it a Tabata bike. And Tabata, the whole idea, right, is that it's 4 minutes of 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off, right? So we basically do that on the bike, and it's an hour ride that has 4 minutes of work. So you're building up into your zone 1 or zone 2. And then those 20-second intervals are like legitimately max effort, give everything that you've got. Like if you start puking, that means that you've done a great job. So those 10-second recoveries are like a standstill, but I guess looping it back to running, it's usually just a downgrade of pace.
Right. Just real quick on that Tabata question, or Tabata example, because it sounds like we might have found someone who actually uses Tabata in the correct fashion. Is that so? You said it's like an hour-long ride, but then you have the 4 intervals, and then is that it? Like you have a short recovery period after those 4 intervals, and it's just that one block, or do you do multiple blocks of those Tabata intervals?
Yeah, so that specific workout is just one set of intervals, and it's actually 8 total intervals. So it's 4 minutes of work, which is 20 on, 10 off, and you repeat it 8 times, and that gets you to 4 minutes.
Right.
So just because of the amount that pushes up just the intensity, that leverages the ATP energy system, which really gets maxed out at about 15 or 20 seconds. So people are super, super cooked by the end of that. And it feels weird to have an hour ride where you're only doing, quote, 4 minutes of work, but we basically work it as a slow build, you know, probably 20, 25 minutes. And then we insert the work, and then we have a bit of a downgrade recovery.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's so interesting. I know if Rachel has a bone to pick, it's with like high intensity fitness studios who are like, come and do our Tabata class. And you're like, well, if it's a 30-minute Tabata class, then it's not fucking Tabata. Like there's no way that you're doing this correctly. Cause like you said, it's supposed to be a max effort. So that's cool, man. It's just cool to hear that like as a part of the overall strategy.
Yeah, and one thing I guess to just riff on that a little bit more, and this is pretty true of any interval set that I do or that I coach, is I really make an effort to have all intervals either at a consistent effort or even a progressive effort. From what I've read online, that's essentially the way that you can get the greatest fitness development from an interval set. And if instead you kind of max yourself and blast out on rep 1 or set 1 and then kind of taper down as you finish that and kind of limp to the finish line, that's not the greatest way to just attain the most fitness gain from it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to find it. I know we did this last time when you and I were on, but we were just like reading through different pieces of this. But Pavel talks a little bit in Strong Endurance about sort of what the actual purpose of interval training was when they first started experimenting with it. And it's kind of what you're talking about, which is that in theory, and I know these guys are pretty familiar with this, in theory, like you want to try to maximize the output of each interval. And if you can, try to prevent a loss of that output as you're going along. And so I'm pretty sure this is the paragraph. And he said, the goal is not to take the athlete to exhaustion, to accustom them to acidosis, as is often understood in practice, but the opposite, to develop power and couple it with endurance to increase the oxidative qualities that develop muscular endurance. And then he says, the idea is to improve capacity, which avoids fatigue instead of improving capacity to tolerate fatigue. And I think that's exactly what you're getting at, is like, if you get better at these power outputs, there's going to be less fatigue on each interval. And that's really the thing that's improving your fitness. And it is important to increase tolerance, I think. But I think so many folks are focused on that aspect. Like, you just need to get good at the part that sucks. And it's like, that's not enough on its own, really.
Yeah, that's cool. I didn't know that. And that's definitely some more science than I had. So I appreciate that. But yeah, people are so accustomed to just the idea that more is better and higher intensity is better. And there are times, obviously, that serves great benefit, but especially in extreme endurance, we have to look at a kind of full scope. And a lot of the heart rate stuff is making sure that the CNS isn't impacted too negatively, and that you have the ability to keep the volume up and keep the consistency up, because as with literally progress in anything, if you're not doing it frequently, you're not going to get very good at it.
Mm-hmm. I just had a quick question about like training versus your race day. So your training, you have these kind of established zones and heart rates that you're shooting for, but then when it comes to race day, does that just go out the window and you just like go as hard as possible? Or are you still trying to kind of ramp up and stay on a certain trajectory?
Yeah, so race day heart rate isn't always exactly comparable to training heart rate. There's just more intensity, there's more energy, there's more pressure, there's more stress. You want to do better. So it does not exactly translate. So there is a little bit of perceived effort on race day, but it's still super helpful to use the heart rate as a bit of a guide, especially on that thing that I mentioned with running off the bike. That's something that I haven't really had a ton of success with. At the world's race that I did, I actually did it really well, but every other race I've kind of stunk at it, where it's like I've overbiked, then my heart rate can't really get up on the run, which isn't really reflective of my cardiovascular system. It's more reflective of the fact that my body is just shot. So there's a good way to like balance it all. And then of course you have the nutrition and the hydration part of everything. That's kind of like the fourth leg of triathlon. But you're totally right that it's like, if I'm racing, I'm not like in a set zone and not allowing myself to get out of that. It's more about feeling out and normalizing what my zone is for the day. Like, for example, my zone 1 endurance heart rate zone is 121 to 131. And generally speaking, for an Ironman, like I know that I want to be in that zone, but if I'm in like the lower 130s or the mid 130s, that can be okay. Especially just based on feel. But at the same point, like if I see that getting up towards like 140, I'm like, okay, well, I know that I can't run for 3 or 4 hours at 150. So I got to like just check myself a little bit.
Okay.
I just have one question on that, because I think most of the folks here have experienced it. And I know that we have. Without looking at your heart rate data, can you tell when you're starting, like how quickly can you tell when you're starting to get away from that zone? Like you said, your zone 2 tops out at 131. Like, can you feel when you're at like 135 or 138? Or is it much further by the time you notice that you're getting away from it?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say exactly. I don't have an amazing gauge on where it is within like that kind of a discrepancy. Like if it's only 5 or 10 beats, I'm probably not super great at it. But at the same point, I'm kind of looking at my data the whole time. If I'm targeting something, I will at least check in on it as I'm building into it. I'll try not to just be like staring at it the whole time during a run, but like I will be checking it every couple of minutes. It's really weird though. Like it takes a little bit of time to like settle into an effort. Like a lot of times, like I can find that like my heart rate starts to race, but maybe it's not like necessarily reflective. Maybe it's just kind of my system kind of being a little bit like, holy cow, now we're really moving fast and we weren't doing anything 10 minutes ago. I also have a super, super low resting heart rate. So
Yeah, in
there
the
are times that
30s, I
like,
think I've seen in your posts. I'm like, oh my God, man.
yeah. So like my resting is usually around 34, 35. So there are times that it's really, really hard for me to get up to even like 140 something, 150 something. But as I'm learning actually like right now, like outdoor conditions just make a huge difference on that. Like I had a run on Saturday and it was super, super hot. I wore a couple of extra layers because I'm trying to get some heat adaptation for Texas. And my heart rate was like skyrocketed. Like it was like 150. I think my average was 148 or 149. And like the endurance runs that I had done in the previous weeks when it was like still back in February, a little bit colder, like I was very easily doing like 128, 131. So all stuff to just learn and figure out. But yeah, I'm not so much like exactly knowing where it is, but at the same point, like the perceived effort thing does help to just recognize when I'm not like launching myself into a zone that's unattainable for a while or unsustainable, I guess.
I think Maggie, as well as numerous athletes, had that experience in Tokyo, that it was just like insanely hot and humid, and excuse me, it like drove the RPE up massively.
It actually, the temperature never really was higher than like the high 80s, but the humidity was in the 90%, high 80s to 90 percentile the entire time. So when I did one of my math runs there, I was practically walking for my recovery run because my heart just, that's what it needed. It was crazy.
Yeah. And like, I guess I'm trying to figure out like humidity percentages and temperature, because this past weekend in Colorado was kind of one of the first like truly warm weekends. Not even that warm. I think it was like 72 when I went out, but it's super dry out here. And the humidity was like 13%, which I don't really like have a great gauge on what humidity levels are. But someone that I know here was like, oh, it was super humid that day. But I was like, in my mind, I'm like, I felt like it was insanely dry, and I'm still adapting to the climate a bit here. We only came out here a couple of months ago. But yeah, it's super interesting because like on a standard day in standard conditions, 150 heart rate is like, I'm really struggling to maintain that for much more than 20 minutes.
Yeah, we run into that issue a little bit, the weather issue, because our garage is essentially detached from the main structure. So whatever the weather is outside, for the most part, we're going to get it temperature wise. We have a dehumidifier, so it's always super dry in there. But like last summer, I mean, we definitely had 97 or like 99 degree training days.
Plus.
And it would just be so hot in there, and it changes everything. Like it changes your warm up, or especially with kettlebell work. Like if it goes from 15% humidity to 30, like the entire workout changes because you just can't hold on to it as well anymore.
But it did pay off. You're talking about Texas and Florida. Last September, when I assisted at a cert in Florida, all the assistants have to test out before the weekend starts, and a lot of the other folks coming from the Midwest or like other parts of the country, like tore their hands. And, you know, these people have been using the bells for a long time and usually don't tear. And they really struggled with the snatch tests and things like that. And I was like, oh, I'm actually thankful for the 95-degree garage, because like 80-degree Florida was fine.
Yeah, it's so interesting how those adaptations and just like, I guess being familiar with that makes a difference. I've actually seen like really interesting stuff on the exact opposite side of that. We were living in an Airbnb for a couple of months to start this year, and the basement was super, super cold. And that's where our bike trainer was. So I would do a couple of rides and like see super, super low heart rates. And like, it kind of threw off what I was measuring, because it's like, I just did a 3+ hour ride and my heart rate average was like 120 or something like that, which is just shockingly low. And then all of a sudden, like I rode outside for the first time over the past 2 weeks, essentially. And it's like, on top of the fact that there's just a little bit more adrenaline to be outside, all of a sudden there's, you know, the temperature outside, the conditions outside, and all of a sudden like it's a lot higher. So kind of circling back to like what you were saying about race day, it's like I've even seen that just from indoor to outdoor.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Well, I think in the end, if you like, at least for me, I seek to be a generalist, like to sort of learn lots of different skills and build lots of different adaptations. And I think in the situation like for us where we're training in our garage, like that just helps because it's like I have to do it regardless of what stage of the year we're in. So
Yeah, in the
you
winter,
get
it's like
used to
45.
training in extreme cold, not extreme, but like in cold temperatures and hot temperatures. Whereas if you if you're training in a commercial gym, like it's probably always 68 degrees and like 30% humidity or something like that. And that's just not going to be the case on competition or game days or things like that. Like those conditions change. I know Ben has been out there in like blizzards and crazy rainstorms and stuff like that. So it's like, you got to be ready for anything.
Pittsburgh weather.
Pittsburgh weather. Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to talk about that. The nutrition stuff. You mentioned nutrition is the fourth leg of triathlon. And I kind of want to do like two parts on nutrition if you're interested in talking about it. The first being like nutrition for sport. And then the second being nutrition like for daily life and health and stuff like that. But as far as nutrition for sport, the first thing I wanted to get on with you was, can you talk a little bit about how you have, because I've seen your posts about it, but how you have taken, let's say, the distance or the duration of a ride, like a long ride, and then worked yourself backwards into how much sugar you should be consuming on a time scale? Because I thought that it was cool that you're like taking a math approach to your training nutrition.
Yeah, so I've had a really wild nutrition experience over like the past 15 months probably. And I can get into some of the more like day-to-day lifestyle stuff after this, but my nutrition exploration really started by eating fully carnivore last January and then fully plant-based in February. And the goal of that was really to check in on some blood work stuff and just kind of see how those diets work, just because they're so polarizing. And the big thing that I took away from that was eating a lot of meat and eating like almost no processed food. When I did the plant-based month, I really didn't eat anything packaged, maybe just like an almond butter that's like only almonds. So I didn't really do any of the fake meats. And those were like the two core themes that stuck with me. And exiting that and all of last year, I really did a lot of the low carb stuff. I've fasted for probably 5 or 6 years and really enjoyed that. It's really helped me with like day-to-day type stuff. So as I got into triathlon, I was very reluctant to give up those lifestyle things and just those normal practices of mine, while at the same time trying to push my performance. And one thing that I ultimately came to learn was just that I was underfueled for like all of my races last year. I wasn't really doing any carbs before my races. I would loop in carbs on the bike once I got through the swim. And there's some science and some logic, behind those practices, but that was ultimately what I was doing. And just my big takeaway, even though I did well a couple of times, was just that I was underfueled. So I've made a big overhaul into my nutrition over the past couple of months, basically going from low carb to either high carb or complete carb, whatever you want to call it. And I still really stick true to the no processed food stuff. So like another reason why I leaned towards the low carb was like, okay, that means I don't have to eat any goos or gels or all this other crap that people eat in endurance events. But figuring out that I now want to loop in carbs, I've just been experimenting a ton with what I want to take. So I started out trying like just honey. I would do bananas and stuff like that, but I evolved eventually to just having pure maple syrup. And that's essentially what I do for my rides and my runs now. I'm still trying to figure out how I can get a little bit of protein or a little bit of fat in at some point throughout the day. But for the most part, I'm just pure sugar and pure carb in the maple syrup. And it's just been kind of doing the math on it, honestly. I mean, a big thing with triathlon is just the convenience of it and how can you transport it. And that's why a lot of people use the goos and gels, because real food is a little bit more of a pain in the ass to have in your pockets, to get out on the bike, all that stuff. So what I've been doing is just using like these plastic hydro flasks. And I basically just do the math on how many milliliters they are. The one that I started with was 150. The maple syrup jar that I've got is a 60 milliliter serving that's got 200 calories. So I know that I can put 2.5 servings into a flask. So that gets me 500 calories. And I just started by playing out, how much I wanted to take in over the duration of the performance or the session. But one thing that like had kind of been a driver or like at least guiding me was the idea of fueling every 15 minutes. I think when I first started riding and would bring snacks and stuff, I'd just kind of eat on the hour. But I've gotten into a little bit of glucose data and CGM type stuff that has really guided me towards having steady levels of energy. So that's why the 15-minute fueling comes in, and just kind of circling the wagons on all of that stuff has just led me to just narrowing in on about 90 calories or 90 grams of carbs an hour for about 360 calories. I've been referencing some data from my Garmin just on like the expected calorie burn of different sessions that I've had. I think there's a little bit of an estimation there, but I can still look back at all of my rides and runs and see how many calories I supposedly burned. And the idea is getting in around half or maybe a little bit more. So it's just been a big experiment for me, and I really like it. I've really grown to love nutrition, and I love what I eat, and I love feeling great. So it's like a big game for me, and just bringing it into the performance side of everything is just kind of taking it to another level.
So awesome. I think I'm going to go with that strategy.
Just maple syrup.
Yeah. Dude,
We have it. We have a lot of it.
I think that's like a really underestimated component of training performance is like in-session nutrition or like pre-session nutrition. And it doesn't take much, right? Like 15. So for a strength training session, which is obviously different, but 15 to 20 grams of carbs leading into that session can make a huge difference in power output, or even just like your mental fatigue. But our kids love maple syrup, so it should be an easy transition.
I wasn't sure if you like had individual sticks and you were just like doing the sticks, because the only place I've seen those is like literally when we go apple picking. I'm like, what is,
yeah, there are companies
syrup
that make them. There was one company that I used that had them in like little gel packets, so they looked exactly like the goos and the gels that most people have. In terms of like my general training, I literally just get it out of a jug and I put it into that hydro flask thing. I might experiment with the packets for race day if it's a little bit easier, depending on, I don't know, how much I need to carry, if I want to loop in caffeine. I'm still tinkering with that a little bit, but yeah, for the most part, it's just a jug of pure maple syrup, nothing added, nothing else, and right into the mouth.
Awesome. There was one other question I wanted to ask. As far as that type of nutritional strategy, what training volume, like what single session volume do you think requires that type of fueling? Like 30 minutes of effort, 45 minutes, like where should someone start beginning to experiment with that type of stuff?
Yeah, so like, I guess the big thing on that is two things, like session duration and then session intensity. And I think that I ran into roadblocks in both those directions. So I'll tell you what I learned on them. So session duration, anything that's longer than like an hour, I think absolutely should have carbohydrate intake, but it also needs to be paired with what your intensity is. So if you're staying in like a super low intensity, you're actually quite fine, even up until 90 minutes. I mean, people can do much longer than that. There was a ride that I did 2 summers ago. I rode 70 miles outdoor fasted. So like you can really push it if you want. I don't know how healthy that is, honestly. I'm sure that I was tapping into muscle glycogen at some point. But one of the things that I ran into with my nutrition problems was that when you spike your heart rate to a certain level, your body just starts demanding glucose, and you really switch over from any kind of free fatty acid fueling. So if you are doing an interval session and you don't really have topped off glycogen stores, you know, the science just says that your body is going to be forced hard, and it's going to tap into different places for fuel because it's being pushed hard. So that's kind of how I go about it. I guess like the way that I train now and the way that I fuel now is I'll fuel for every ride unless it's a recovery ride. The recovery rides that I do are just like a pure spin out, like it's heart rate under 100 RPMs, just super quick. You're just like flushing the legs. I usually try to eat something before I swim, but sometimes if I do morning swims, I'm not always like wanting to have a huge bowl of oatmeal or something, and it depends on the duration. But that's kind of the general notes on it. I really encourage like the athletes that I work with to be fueling for every session, unless it's a recovery session, just because they're going to be getting benefit from it. I guess there's one other area that like is kind of a point of discussion, and that's just like in setting up your defense against running out of glucose. So one big issue in any kind of endurance sport is the term bonking, and that's just basically when you blow up and you're done. You're physically fatigued. You're mentally fatigued. You mentioned mentally a minute ago, but if you bonk, like there are even pro athletes who have bonked and had the DNF because of it. And you can basically set up a little bit of a guardrail against bonking if you have some good metabolic flexibility and can burn some fat for fuel. So that's kind of one of the things that I like to tap into too, where it's like, if you want to go ride for 60 minutes or even 90 minutes and you're keeping it in your zone 1, you're not going to be tapping into muscle glycogen. Most likely you're going to be establishing a little bit more metabolic flexibility. So there's a lot of different avenues on it, but that's kind of the main ones that I think on.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome.
I'm going to use that term now.
That I think is like
Really?
the term in literature is to bonk.
I tend to bonk. So
Yeah.
Bonking, yeah. And it was funny, I meant to mention it a minute ago, but you said 15 to 20 grams of carbs just heading into a session can make a huge difference. And one of the things that kind of guided me towards the maple syrup fueling was that a lot of the lifting buddies that I have really, really swear by taking natural honey before and potentially even during their workouts. And that was what I said. I started doing honey, and I just personally like the maple syrup a little bit more. There's got a little bit less acidity to it. But that's kind of the logic on the whole idea.
Yeah, I'll tell you, man. I mean,
Jelly
it's a processed food, but a handful of jelly beans will go a long way prior to doing some weightlifting.
They're
Yeah.
from Whole Foods. They're organic
So,
jelly beans.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no judgment from me. I know I see people even at like the ultra events that I did. It's like people are taking down M&Ms, God knows what else, and they're continuing on. And
well, and I think Mike Israetel of Renaissance Periodization does a good job of this, where he's like, at the end of the day, like the end product in most of these situations will be the same. Like it's going to be after digestion and internal processing, like you have glucose, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes you just got to get it done, man. What else? I don't know if I want to do. I mean, we could do some sleep stuff, but
I was just curious.
Let's
like,
finish nutrition like on a day-to-day basis. And I guess I can frame it to be a little more specific, but like, what do you think are the big things that are important for people like from a health perspective? Like what would your main tenets of nutrition be?
Yeah, so I guess like my biggest thing just remains to be as little processed food as possible. If you're keeping your ingredient list clean, then it's kind of hard to mess up your nutrition unless you're massively overeating. I think that like 2 core tenets that I definitely subscribe to are no seed oils and no refined sugar. I'm pretty big on the seed oil type of discussion. I don't know how versed this group is, but seed oils are kind of in everything and they're in a lot of processed foods. And I definitely have felt a lot better since I've removed them. So what did I say here? No seed oils, no added sugar. Those are like the 2 that I look for if I'm getting something out of a box or a bag. And I'm just really particular about the ingredient list. Like I mentioned almond butter, like I'll get almond butter. It's obviously packaged, but it's just almonds. It's not the one that's like got almonds and got sunflower oil and got added sugar and got high fructose corn syrup. So it's like making decisions like that have been super, super impactful for me. I really do encourage people to try fasting, depending on what performance you're trying to get. It might not be the greatest thing for you, but for the average person, I think it's really helpful to establish some level of metabolic flexibility. And also like just the mental empowerment from not feeling like you actually need food around the clock. I think that most people like start their day with a cup of coffee with sugar in it, and then they have snacks throughout the morning and they're basically feeding their body glucose, and usually shitty glucose, all the way from morning till night. And so getting off of that system, I think is super, super helpful. I'm a big proponent of a lot of the carnivore literature. I eat a lot of meat. I don't know that I always hit a gram per pound of body weight, but that's like the direction that I skew. I think it's helpful for people to time their carbs around exercise relatively, especially people who aren't super into performance. Like if they can stay kind of low carb in the morning, I think that there's a big benefit to that if they're not really doing anything. If they're sitting at a desk all day, they don't really need a big flush of glucose. So those are kind of the core tenets that I think on. I drink a lot less than I used to. That's been huge for me. I used to drink, I think, as any type of college person can probably relate to, just drinking all the time, mass volume. And now, like, I don't even necessarily, I probably drink like once every 2 to 3 weeks. And when I do, I probably don't have more than 3 drinks. And that's probably like the foundation of overall, like kind of how I approach things and the direction that I try to guide people. I try not to let people get too caught up in the whole carb debate, because I think that at the end of the day, it's total calories that make the biggest difference. One kind of fun fact that I'll probably wrap up the food debate with is, I think it's really interesting. I learned this year that for every gram of carb you eat, your body retains 3 to 4 grams of water. And so a lot of the hate that carbs get are, I think, a lot related to the fact that, one, people usually eat crappy carbs that have refined sugar that aren't really good for them in general. But regardless, whenever you take in carbs, your body's just going to be holding on to more water. So a lot of people like feel leaner when they go low carb. And while low carb can lead to overall weight loss, a lot of that feeling just comes from their body not quite holding on to much and not quite being as doughy. And those are just a couple of things that I guess I've learned through over the past year or so.
Yeah, that's awesome. Sounds like you're on the right track, man.
We don't really have to get into sleep. I was just curious, like, how many hours of sleep do you get?
Yeah, I try as best I can to prioritize my sleep. I'm in kind of a fortunate situation where I don't really need to be getting up to do 4 a.m. workouts and stuff like that. So like today, I said I haven't been feeling super great over the past couple of days. So like I slept in today because I knew I wanted it and I knew I needed it. I try to make sure that I'm in bed. If I'm in bed in the 9 o'clock hour, that's great. If I'm in bed in the 10 o'clock hour, I definitely try to not make it much past 10, 15, 10, 20. Occasionally it happens. Occasionally I'll try to go to bed at 8:30 if I'm really wiped. But in general, I do prioritize my sleep a lot. I think that like some people can just operate on different levels of sleep. And if I have to be going on low sleep, it's not a huge deal. But I try to set myself up for success if I am having to go on an early alarm for a continual period of time.
So like, what's your optimal number of hours?
Let's see, optimal hours, at least 7, definitely at least 7. And if I can get it a little bit above 8, then that's great. I've always been kind of an early riser, so it's really rare that I'm sleeping more than 8 in a couple minutes, honestly. That's probably the general range. And there have been times in my life that I've been continually going on, closer to 6 or maybe even 5. And if I'm in that routine, then I can be totally fine, or at least seem like it. But if I just all of a sudden decide to set my alarm for 2 hours earlier than I'm getting up now, it's not going to be a fun morning.
Yeah. Awesome. Do you want to?
Oh, I got so much stuff. Maggie's got to go. See you, Maggie. Thanks for hopping on.
Thanks for hopping on.
I just wanted to see if maybe we could get into like potentially even pull up our spreadsheet and just play around with it. But I was curious if you could kind of help me design a program for people who suck at running, and like people, and I'm not necessarily including myself in this. But,
I am.
Hell yeah, I love doing this. This is one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah, if you had a person who's done nothing, like they're completely new, what would that look like? And let's just pretend they don't have any goals. Like it's not like they came to you and said, I want to run a marathon in 6 months or whatever. Like if you were going to build this person's capacity from the ground up, with no time constraints, like what would that look like in terms of volume and intensity and frequency and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I got a little notepad here. Let me make sure I'm giving you the full details. I just want to jot down a couple of different runs. So that would be the first thing. It's just like, let's establish a few different runs. First is going to be a base run.
Mm-hmm.
Next is going to be a tempo run. Next is going to be a progressive run. Next is going to be an interval run. And we'll cap it off and round it out with recovery run. So all of these different names basically have heart rate associations related to them, but it can easily be translated to perceived effort. So one thing that I really like to establish with new runners and people who don't have any goals, it's like, okay, the goal then is to get comfortable running and to become good at it and to feel out different performance levels and to be comfortable changing gears. So that base run is just going to be like, what feels natural and sustainable for you? Like, just go out and run. And I guess I should say that, like, the biggest thing, maybe not the biggest, but something that I think is super important is doing all run programming by time and not by distance. Cool. And I think that this helps people get out of the cycle of being like, oh, I'm almost done, and maybe trying to push their effort too hard because you just have a set duration. It's also a little bit easier to schedule things that way, and you know how much time you have to allocate.
Just
so
real
based
quick
on
on that,
go ahead.
because this is something that Rachel and I have discussed without, or I wouldn't say without, but I would say with minimal running experience. And we sort of came to the same conclusion, which was that if we're talking about volume and intensity, well, if the intensity is an assigned heart rate zone, just as an example, the speed or the pace associated with that heart rate is going to change constantly due to weather conditions or all sorts of other stuff. And so now the distance, actually, if you're running slower and you have an assigned distance, it's going to be more volume because it took you longer to do it. But if it's time, then the volume of cardiovascular effort becomes the same. So it's just interesting to hear that, because that was kind of our conclusion, which was like, if we pull away from distance, now we have data that's comparable from session to session. So it seems like that's pretty important for you too.
Yeah, it's super helpful. And it's just easier to break it up and define how many minutes we're in certain zones. It's easier for people to execute on because they know exactly how long the session will be. And especially for introductory people, it gets them out and kicks out the door the idea of starting out by running 1 mile or 2, which is just totally pointless in my opinion. Every run is a minimum of 25 minutes. And if you don't think you can run for 25 minutes, then it's okay if you need to walk, but you need to be out there for 25 minutes. Like, we need to establish a baseline. So that first run I mentioned, which is the base run, that's just the idea of go out, run how feels natural and sustainable for you. Then a tempo run would be kind of like what I described earlier, where it's, maybe for a beginner, we would do it as a 40-minute run. Maybe we'd do a 10-minute warm-up build. We'd probably insert 2 10-minute tempo pushes, have a 5-minute recovery in between, and we'd finish duration. I usually just describe it as finish as you feel. So it might be in your zone 1, might be a little bit slower, probably shouldn't be up into your other zones. I will mention that the zone 1 that I refer to is typically what most people call zone 2. So that's just the
I remember you said that. Yeah.
Then a progressive run. This is how you really evolve into becoming a good runner. This is just developing a progressive pace and heart rate for the duration of the run. So starting out super slow, I usually encourage people to use the mile alert on their watch as an opportunity to uptick effort. But we really want to just see a steady climb on heart rate, with that eventually peaking towards the, at your heart rate max for those final few minutes. An interval run would be more
for max for the zone, or like max theoretical max.
Your max heart rate. Yeah. So
Okay.
you're really hauling ass most effort. Then another one would just be like an interval run. And a good opportunity or a good example of an interval session might be, 40 minutes, pretty standard 10 to 15 minute build up into your zone 1. And then maybe 5 by 60-second pushes. I like to do 60-second pushes on hills. So it's a bit of an endurance effort. You're not exactly just sprinting for 60 seconds. Sometimes on more advanced runners, I'll do 2-minute pushes. Those 2-minute pushes have quite a long recovery. The recovery effort is usually at least 1-to-1. In those 5 by 60-second, it'd probably be 5 by 60-second with 2-minute recoveries. If it's 5 by 2-minute, it'd probably be 5 by 2-minute with 4-minute recoveries. But that's just an example of an interval type run. And then a recovery run would be to kind of bring it full circle. And I touched on some of the pacing stuff from the beginning. So that would be like 3 minutes per mile slower than your base run pace. And so once I would like establish these 5, I would just get these into a consistent cycle and a consistent rotation. We'd probably start off with a base run, then we'd get them into a tempo run. I'd probably want to give them a couple before I assign them with a progressive run, because I want to give you a little bit of a chance to feel out the heart rate zones and whatnot before getting into that. But yeah, just cycling these around, using the recovery run after hard sessions. So whether it's after an extended tempo session, or either really a progressive or an interval session as well would help. That would be really a super strong formula to get somebody started. And again, 25 minutes would be like the base for anything, but I would really kick it to 35, like as soon as they did 1 or 2 runs. And then that can be stretched up to an hour. I think that one thing that a lot of people don't really think about when they're like just conceptualizing running for an hour is that like you can really manipulate the intensities and the duration, and you can have significant cool downs so that like it's a 1 hour session of stressing your cardiovascular system, and maybe not necessarily just torturing yourself running for an hour at a steady state.
Yeah, I tend to gravitate towards the just single pace torture session.
Yeah. And there's like some science to it too. The idea is that, you know, I really subscribe to the 80-20 stuff. I know that we've talked about this, but 80% of the time being in your low intensity. So I would say that would be your zone 1. And I would define the zone 1 just for some quick zone examples. Once you know your heart rate max, 78% of that max should be the top of your zone 1 or the top of your endurance zone. So if you want to call it zone 2, whatever it is. That would really be the top of that endurance zone. And then your zones are just 10 beats per zone. And the math usually checks out exactly that top of then the 5th zone would be your heart rate max.
So just to reiterate, you said heart rate max times 78 would be the top of zone 1.
Times 0.78 would be the top of your endurance zone, which I refer to as zone 1.
Okay.
And then my zone 2 is my tempo zone. Zone 3 is really what I call threshold. Zone 4 is red line, where you're really not able to hold that for much more than a minute or a couple minutes. And then zone 5 would be like super max. And then in terms of like rounding it out completely, beneath zone 1, there is a 10 beat gap to your zone recovery. And the reason why I kind of structure it that way is just to prioritize the recovery. I definitely see from a lot of people that like do the quote standard zone 2 training, they don't really ever go below that zone unless it's just like a quick warm up into the session. Whereas, the recovery efforts are very decidedly below that zone. Hopefully, once you've had some experience, you can manipulate your heart rate a little bit. And I really make an effort, especially on rides, but on runs too, to really define like a 20-minute gradual build into that zone 1. So to give yourself just additional time. But to circle back to the 80-20 idea, whether it's any of these types of runs, it's still very possible to do a tempo, a progressive, or an interval run with close to 80%, if not 80% of that total time being in your zone 1 or below. Cool. And the whole point of that is for central nervous system response, which I touched on earlier, I think.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Well, it's funny because in strength training, folks always refer to like deadlifts as being super taxing on the CNS and like very heavy lifting and stuff like that. And then there was some research that I saw, I think within the last 2 years, and it said that CNS fatigue had more to do with like duration of activity than like single effort intensity. So like weightlifting as an example.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was so interesting because I was like, it kind of makes sense in a way, like more than likely you'll be much more fatigued mentally from an hour long tempo run. And I'm just making up an example, than you will be from like 2 super heavy sets of deadlifts. And it makes sense intuitively, but then, that was what they were finding is like, sorry guys, like these strength lifts are not as taxing on the CNS as you think. So that's cool that there's manipulation of intensity in endurance sports to deal with CNS.
Yeah. And I try to figure it out a little bit more. Like I'm trying to understand more just about like the CNS impact, because that's still kind of a new thought model for me. But it's just super interesting to just feel out how my body recovers from this type of stuff. And, outdoor conditions, like we've touched on a couple of times, definitely makes a huge impact, but it's cool to see myself bounce back from really long efforts. kind of contradictory to the idea of keeping your heart rate low. My heart rate was super high on that long run that I mentioned this past Saturday when it was super hot and super dry, but I recovered super quickly for it. So I don't know if that was like good food after, a lot of hydration after. I'm big into pliability these days, so I did a lot of that. But it's nice to just know that like there is a way to really, really push the body as well as keep that consistency up.
Yeah, that's awesome. If you have like 5 minutes, I want to try to build this plan inside of our sheet and just see like what it would come out looking like.
Yeah.
So what I was thinking is maybe, so you had talked about 5 runs. I think we should definitely include a recovery run. Maybe we can program the interval run, and then do you think we should do base runs? And like, just so that we're only working with 3. I mean, we could do all 5, but
I would do base, tempo, and recovery if you're going to pick 3.
Okay. All right, cool. So this will be cool because I don't think we got to do this last time. But I'm going to share the screen. And we're going to go into our tool and we're going to build this plan out. And then we'll see what it looks like. So let's call this, we'll just say that the student, and I don't know if you're able to see it. Hold on, let me zoom in a little further.
It's pretty clear to me.
Okay, all right, cool. I can go a little bigger. All right, so let's just say this is someone who's new to running, and I think you said base run would be part of what we're doing, right? Base, tempo, and recovery.
Correct.
So you had mentioned that we want the efforts to be at least 25 minutes. So there's a lot of stuff that's on the sheet, and I'll try to just stick to the stuff that's important. So we're going to have how many base runs would that individual have in a week? 1?
Well, I guess for total runs, we'd probably have 3, I guess would be a good starting spot.
Okay.
So yeah, we can just do one base run.
Okay. So what I'll do, I'll show you. Oh, no, I can't see. There we go. So each of these tabs down here is like different movements or different classes of whatever we're programming. So this tab 1 we'll call the base run. This one we would do the tempo run, and this one the recovery run. And then so this here is the frequency. So we'll figure out a number here that works. But you said for the base runs, we want it to be 25 minutes or longer, right?
Yeah. So I would really start somebody with probably a 35-minute.
Okay. And that would be the smallest they would have over like a 4-week period.
The recovery runs are usually like 25 or 30 minutes.
Okay.
But
Okay,
base
cool.
run, yeah, 35 minutes I think is good.
So let's just punch the
35
number.
to an hour.
Yeah, let's see.
Yeah, exactly
So-
35 to an hour.
That's
So-
gonna be too short.
Yeah, I know, I'm working on it. So what this is that I'm punching in here, this is called number of lifts, but it can also be number of minutes or basically
Okay.
anything else that you could think of. In this case, it would be minutes. So we want to find, what did we say? The shortest run is at least 35 minutes. So we got to go up. So 200, let's go to 250. All right, so
Oh, this can be too.
well, hang on. So this is because that's why I wanted to get into this and just sort of like the Delta 20 movements. So sort of the way this system works is you have movements up and down of 20%. So in this system, if we took that base run and we were able to get a minimum of 34 minutes over the course of the next few weeks, if we went up 20% each time, they'd have a 50-minute run, 63, 79. So I'm just curious, like, do you think that is too aggressive for that base run for an individual to scale from 34 minutes up to 80 over 4 weeks? Like, would you want that base run to be relatively fixed?
No, that's a pretty good progression. I mean, it would obviously depend on the person, but like the idea of this base run is like we are in the zone where we can go all day long. So like, I want your fueling to be good. I want your hydration to be good. And as long as you're mentally into it, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to run for 80 minutes at this pace. If they're coming from literally zero running, 80 minutes in 4 weeks might be a little bit on the aggressive side, but if they're tough, they can do it.
Yeah, cool. So this, I just wanted to like get a baseline established so we could sort of show you how that works.
Yeah, that's cool.
but
It's a
then-
percentage increase. I like that a lot.
Yeah. So these are the percentages of the total. So if we have 225 minutes in the month, each week has a certain amount, and these numbers are called stable structural constants. And what that means is that no matter where you move these, they're always a minimum of 20% different from each other. And so this drop down here, these are all the different ways that you could organize that month. So just as an example, right now, we go week 1 is the easiest, week 2, medium, if you will, week 3, high, and then week 4, highest. We could pick any other of these numbers, just as an example. We wouldn't do this for a brand new person, but if we change it here, now you can see week 1 is the second highest, week 2 is the easiest, week 3 is the hardest, so on and so forth. So we can kind of shuffle those around in any which way.
And do those numbers, I guess, just 34, 50, 63, 79, does that add up to 225 roughly?
It's off by one.
By
it's
one, that's what I thought.
227. Okay. Yep. Yeah. So this just tells me like how far is the spreadsheet's rounding compared to what the actual answer is expected to be.
Gotcha.
And that's just in case there's like a major outlier here, then we know, okay, we made a mistake somewhere. So this would be minutes, and we're going to put all of our volume in that category. So now let's do the, and we'll leave it as a 4-week or a week 4 peak. So now let's do the tempo run. So what I was thinking we could do here, you had said tempo run, you program 60-second intervals inside of.
Tempo run is longer intervals, so like 10-minute to 20-minute.
Longer pushes, right? So what would be like a minimum push duration, and then what would be a maximum push duration?
Yeah, so over 4 weeks, I think a great build would just be 10 minutes, then 12, then 15, then 20, or some variation of that.
Right. So let's do, it's probably going to be like 75, and then we need to go to once a week. And you said what for the max? 25?
20 is about the max, 20-minute,
Okay.
20-minute
Cool.
intervals, and there's 2 per session.
Okay. So in this situation, it sounds like I'll do the same thing. We'll just do it over to a week 4 peak, just so it's easier to read. So it looks like we would have 9 minutes split into 2 tempo. You're saying split it in half each time, right?
No, so like that looks great that it would just be 2 9-minute sets, 2 13 that way.
Got it. Okay, cool. So let's go double here then. So this tells us the total tempo volume, and then you would split it into 2 each time as an example.
Super cool.
So this was right where you said, I guess, 2 20-minute.
2 20 and 21,
pushes.
yeah, right there.
Yeah. And so we could do the same thing here. Like, if we know our hardest base run is in the 4th week, we can make the hardest tempo run just choosing randomly, like in week 3. And so you have the power to like change where those peaks are just by selecting. So let's do the same thing. This is tempo minutes, and then 100%. And then the last one is recovery runs. So same thing, like what's for this student, like what would a minimum recovery run and a maximum be?
Yeah, so a good way to add some variation would probably just be 25 minutes up to 45, 40 or 45, whatever would be easier on here would be fine.
Yeah. 50. It's almost there. 45.
There you go.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, cool. So then on the recovery runs, we have a minimum of 19 minutes and then a maximum of 44. So that's pretty close to what you were saying.
Absolutely.
So then when you go and you sum it all up, this is the larger chart. And this is what it would look like is here's their base run table. Here's their tempo run table. and here's their recovery run. And so what you have is all of these sessions are conducted in different ways, but because we measured out the volume, we know that like the different stress level of each session is a minimum of a 20% movement, which is pretty cool. So
Yeah, super cool. I've never seen something like this. This is awesome.
I think maybe what I was thinking when I had written like, let's build a plan together with him was like, maybe then we can link to this plan
From the call.
like in the email or on YouTube or something like that. But I just thought it would also be cool for you, Dreyer, to see like,
Maybe
how
also-
does that like 20% fluctuation happen and how does it move and stuff like that. But this is kind of what it would look like if we applied it to running or some other sport like that.
Yeah, that's super cool. And then I guess like just where the largest effort fell would just be reflective of, I guess, like the other runs that we have going on in the week, and then when their racing is and just how their overall build is going, right? Because you guys work a little bit more with the 20% manipulation. I do a little bit, but not quite as calculated as you, it looks like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think if sort of what we do is you move that peak, that highest volume week relative to what their demands are, like you said, competition demands or otherwise. But then if they're just training, like during the normal part of the year, then it actually doesn't really matter where it goes. And so we'll select that movement randomly for each person. And so then what you get is if you are, let's say this was strength movements, like lower body, upper body presses, and then upper pulls, like they all have their most intense week at different times or sometimes the same time. So there really is no pattern anymore to the stimulus. The only thing that you're tracking is the volume and then how that volume gets executed, the intensity. So, but this is cool. This, I'm going to keep this for my own plan.
Maybe I'll try it out.
But well, cool, man. It's just cool because I think we've been on calls with a lot of folks, and I would say like, oh yeah, we'll pop out of there. I would say, you know, how much volume would you start this person with? And someone would be like, it's just a general vague answer, and no one's ever able to say like, this is exactly how many minutes would probably be appropriate, right? So that was my big goal today. It was like, can we accomplish this? And get an answer. So thank you, man, just for an awesome answer and like a very specific answer. So this is really cool.
Yeah, dude. I like to be decided with it. I know what you mean when I ask questions and it's like the most vague general thing. It's like,
yeah, you're like, come on, man, come on. I'm working on this post idea. It's called sound bites versus sound advice, and like which one are you actually reading when you're reading stuff? And I think most of the time it's sound bites that people are reading. So
where can we find you, Ryan?
Yeah, so I'm super active on Twitter and Instagram. Ryan V Dreyer on Twitter, Dreyer Sheets 21 on Instagram, and my like coaching website is traintribal.com. So you can kind of find everything through there. I write some articles often. I've got some info on the coaching that I offer and just general avenue to me. I've got some stuff on YouTube as well, but still working to continue to kind of circle the wagons on the full content calendar.
Cool.
Yeah, it's hard, man. Awesome. Do you have anything else?
I think that's it.
I don't think so. Yeah.
I
I'm
learned
still
a lot.
working on your spreadsheets. I'm very deep inside all your training data right now. So
well, now that I see kind of what you're looking at, I mean, are you plugging it into something like that?
Yeah. Well, I did kind of like a backwards analysis. So I wrote out like, here's what the month would look like if it was Delta 20. And then like, here's what your actual month looks like. And it's actually really close, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I'm super pumped to see it, especially now that I've got some idea of how that works. I really think that formula stuff is super, super cool.
It's fun, man.
And the variation
cool.
of it is sweet.
We'll have to hop on again, just you and me.
100%.
So, well, cool, man. Thanks a lot. This has just been awesome catching up with you the last couple of weeks, learning from you. I look forward to more. I look forward to getting a kettlebell in your hand at some point. And swinging that thing around. So it's been awesome, man. Great to have you on and great to see you.
Yeah, dude, absolutely. Well, we just moved into our new spot, and as we continue to work on the garage, it'll be the home gym. So I
Nice.
absolutely know that I'll need some kettlebells in there. I just got the monkey foot. We chatted about that actually a little bit, so I'm slowly building it out. But yeah, we'll get some kettlebell workout in my routine. I was just glancing through that article you sent me, and it's got me interested for sure.
Yeah, and those folks are from Penn State, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, I saw at Happy Valley something in Central PA, so I thought that was neat.
Yeah, pretty cool, man. Well, awesome, buddy. We'll see you soon. And Ben, Nikki, thanks for hanging out. And Ben, I'll see you next week. I saw that on the calendar. So, all right,
Yeah,
guys.
sorry, I've been in and out. I've had this one to be contending with. So
Yeah, right.
So cute.
Oh, awesome. All right, guys. We will see you soon. All right.
Sweet. Thank you
Yeah.
guys.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.